I get to say hello. I'm Gloria Kondrup, the Executive Director of the Hoffmitz Milken Center for Typography. Welcome to our fifth summer salon, and we're very excited. First, I would love to introduce my wonderful, wonderful co-host, or the host, because I will disappear and put all the responsibility onto Sean. Sean Adams, who is the chair of ArtCenter's undergraduate and graduate graphic design, and a wonderful partner to work with here at the Typography Center.
Thank
and
you.
Sean is going to do the introductions to Paula. Welcome, Sean, and welcome, Paula.
Thank you, Gloria. Paula, it's so great to see you. It's
lovely to see you.
And I am so jealous. Jessica said she's going to come visit you this weekend. I said she has to give you a giant virtual hug for me. Thank you again for giving us your time today. I appreciate it, and the students are thrilled. And you know, any chance I get to see you. And for those of you that, obviously I don't have to give any introduction to Paula. You all know who she is and the amazing person that she is. I don't think, if you don't know, she is a remarkably generous human being. Like, always there for advice, for help, for so many people. And I don't know if people know that enough about you, that, you know, how committed you are to the community and how much you've given of your life to that. So, you know, thank you for that. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, I'll take it over. I think this is where I share the screen. So I wrote a book, and the book is on my 25-year relationship with the public theater, which is like any marriage. It had its ups and downs. It's still going on. I've had terrific times and terrible times. I have accomplished a lot, and I've learned even more. And it's very unusual in our profession for a designer, particularly one who is in a consultancy business and has many clients, to have this kind of long-term relationship with one client. And the amount I learned is just staggering, and I learned by doing, and I want to introduce you to who the public theater is in case you don't know, and also tell you about my history with it. This is a painting of a man named Joe Papp. Joe Papp is the founder of the New York Shakespeare Festival and the Public Theater. He was an impresario, brought many plays to Broadway, launched the careers of Meryl Streep and Kevin Kline and Sam Shepard and Ed Harris, and also Tony Kushner. You can see him in this painting, is by an American illustrator who you should know. His name is Paul Davis. And Paul Davis, I knew as a young woman when I moved to New York City, because he was at one point part of Pushpin Studios, which was founded by my husband, Seymour Quast, and Milton Glaser, who recently, as you probably know, died. When I was a young woman in New York, everybody admired Joe Papp because what he had done for New York City. He started the New York Shakespeare Festival in a little truck that he moved around different boroughs of New York and put on plays impromptu. He put on free Shakespeare. And he got good actors and actresses out of the best drama schools to perform, and sometimes he even got famous celebrities. And he got a lot of acclaim and was beloved by New Yorkers, and the city of New York let him use this space that was the old Delacorte Theater, an outdoor amphitheater in Central Park. And every summer he put on free Shakespeare in the park for all of New York to come. And it's an amazing thing and exists to this day. It's really a New York institution. He also did another dramatic thing. He purchased this building downtown near Cooper Union in New York City, in an area that at one point was bordering the East and West Village. But in fact, right now, it's part of an area called NoHo. And NoHo became, in this period of time from when he purchased the building in the very early 70s, it became probably the most expensive real estate in New York City, this whole area of about 5 blocks in front of Soho, which became an incredible loft area, an area of vibrant activities and retail and restaurants, etc. But nobody would have known he could do that at the time. This was a derelict building. It was the old last Astor Library, and he saved it from destruction. He launched a musical called Hair that was popular when I was in college, and I actually hated the musical because I was a hippie in college, and real hippies didn't behave like people in Hair. They didn't dance around in the park and sing. You know, they mostly did other things like take drugs. And that this to me was sort of the way radical chic like to see their hippies. And I didn't respect it, but when I moved to New York City, I went to the Public Theater with my husband, and I saw a play that opened for the very first time, and I saw it on the steps of the Public Theater, which is where you sat when you didn't get a seat. And it was called A Chorus Line, and it was one of the most amazing Broadway shows I'd ever seen. It went to Broadway. It was a huge hit, and I began to go to the Public Theater fairly regularly. The 2 posters you're seeing on your right were both painted by Paul Davis. Paul Davis worked with Joseph Papp for 19 years, and a lot of the plays that Joseph Papp produced at the Public Theater went to Broadway. They were terrific posters. They're very collectible and very important in American illustration. But of the 19 years that Paul did these posters, really the first 5 to 10 were significant. And after that, the actors and actresses began to take control of their images on the posters, and Paul had to do very stilted portrait paintings for the posters, and they lost their interest. At that period of time, he was getting somewhat bored with the project, and he began doing posters for Mobile Masterpiece Theater. And what happened with that was that people in New York City would see posters for Mobile Masterpiece Theater and the Public Theater, and they thought that the Public Theater was part of public television where Mobile Masterpiece Theater appeared. In 1990, Joe Papp died, and a new director was put in place, and her name was Joanne Ecolitis. They had asked another director to take the job before Joanne Ecolitis, a director named George Wolfe. And George turned the directorship down because he said nobody could follow Joe Papp. It was destined for failure. And he was absolutely right. Joanne Ecolitis, who was a completely competent director, lasted 2 years and then was replaced by George. At that period of time in my life, I was a record cover art director during the sort of heavy Paul Davis period, and I was very influenced by his work. But my work was really that of a Main Street art director. I did record covers for virtually everyone. Some of them were my ideas and I controlled them. Some of them were collaborations with recording artists, and some of them were aberrations that I cannot forgive myself for, showing you 3 in a row that do that. And I made lots and lots of these. I did them all through the 70s. And in 1982, I left and I became a designer with my own business and a business partner named Terry Coppell. And during that period, I was doing a pile of work that was influenced by early American modernism and used historic typography and made pistaches and parodies. And one of the pieces I did that became infamous was this Swatch watch poster, which I designed in 1994. And when I had designed that poster, it was not terribly exceptional. I remember it got into some annuals and it was reproduced, but in about 1989, did I say 1992? In 1984, I designed this poster. In 1989, a designer named Tibor Kalman, who was in fact a friend of mine, publicly criticized it at a design symposium. And that was pre-social media, where you weren't used to being criticized publicly, and you weren't used to having people stand up and tell you your work was terrible. And I had never even seen it done publicly. So I was absolutely decimated by this. And then there was a period of amazingly bad press about it. Like I remember that there was an article, there were articles in all the magazines questioning whether it was good history or bad history. And I just felt completely vulnerable and exposed by it. Also, at that particular period of time, there was a recession. And the recession happened, and my partner, who was a magazine designer, lost the magazines he was working on, and as a result took a staff job, and I was left alone managing my business. So here I was in the absolute nadir of my career, and a friend of mine who I had known for 10 years named Woody Pirtle came over to my office and asked me if I'd be interested in joining Pentagram, which seemed so out of the blue and bizarre in relationship to how I was feeling. And I thought, well, if I joined this group of men, they could protect me from all this criticism. And I was sort of anxious to join. So I joined a group of men. Here they are. This is what that looked like at that time in 1991 when I joined the group. You might recognize Kid Heinrichs and Michael Beirut in the front. Woody Pirtle sitting next to a man named Colin Forbes who's seated. And most of these people who are in this picture, I think, I can count them. I think only 3 of them are currently partners now. That's how much it changed. And there are, as you see, 1 woman in the partnership in 1991. There are now 6, so 6 times as many. It's multiracial, not tremendously so, but much more so than this. But this was the organization I joined at the time. And I remember after I joined it, the criticism went away. However, the way I felt in the group was really diminished. I felt like even though I had made all these record covers and had a certain amount of fame from the infamous work, I felt like I had never done a big identity project that everybody knew and saw, where when I went to the London office, I would see the V&A Museum, and it would be done by my partner, Alan Fletcher, or there would be Boots in London that was designed by my partner, John McConnell, and it seemed like the London designers really owned the town. So I didn't think I would feel significant as a designer in Pentagram until I got a project that was on that kind of scale with that kind of visibility. This is George Wolfe, and he became director of the Public Theater in 1994. And he saw some of my work in a book that was published by my future partner, Michael Beirut, D.K. Holland, and Bill Drentel. It was called Graphic Design New York. And designers were invited to purchase space in this book to show their work. And I bought, I think there were 6 pages per designer if you were invited in. And I bought my 6 pages, and there was a spread in the book that George Wolfe saw that looked like this. It was a poster from CBS Records and another poster I had done on my own at Paula Scher. And Pentagram had also purchased its own space in the book, and I had offered to give my space to Pentagram when I joined, and thinking we'd all get more space together. And Colin Forbes said, no, let's build you up. You keep the space. And I said, well, what will you call it? They said, well, we'll use your name. And I was positive he was going to kick me out, because otherwise, why would he allow me to keep the space? But to this day, I thank him for it, because I never would have had 2 posters side by side at that scale if he hadn't let me keep my space. This is what theater advertising looked like at that time. It still looks like it to a great degree now. For some reason, a lot of it is amazingly banal. Terrible typography, overwrought things that don't work together, and sometimes even worse because they'll have little cute taglines or things that make your skin crawl. The Public Theater was a populist theater, but it was a theater for everybody. It was really New York City population, all included, every sex, every race, every form of behavior, any way you dress, you're welcome at the Public. It was not designed to be uptown. It was designed to be just for everyone. I absolutely hated the theater advertising of the times, and I admired Paul Davis's poster, but I was told by George Wolfe that he really wanted to cleanse the palette and do something utterly different. So I assumed probably the best thing to do was something based on typography as opposed to imagery. And I looked at theater advertising that existed in Victorian times in London. And they would do these beautiful pieces of wooden typography that existed, sometimes painted on the sides of the building or in ads. And they would say the name of the play or the name of somebody who wrote the play, and it would be very big, and it would have the date and the time, and it would have nothing else, sort of just the facts, ma'am type of design. And I thought that a language like this would be very good for this theater. Then in terms of thinking about the logo, I came across this page that I loved in the Rob Roy Kelly American Wood Type book, which was, I had the 1968 version. And if you notice, they have these demonstrations of these different typefaces where all the R's are shown in their thinnest and thickest form within the same character of the font. And I thought this would be a great way to express diversity. So we drew the public theater logo and drew it based on the weights of those fonts as they corresponded to the letter forms here, and did some jiggling back and forth. The type and the work on this particular part of the project was done by my assistant at the time. His name was Ron Louie, and he recently died of COVID. He was an early casualty on it. And I wrote to his wife, who I really barely knew, and she told me about his love for doing this work at that point in his career. And so I just want to make that tribute to him because he was so terrific. These pieces were designed by hand. In other words, that you couldn't set this type. This type existed as woodblock type. And I had set the alphabet of this type from a place called Haber Typographers in New York. And I kept complete alphabets of it, and I cut it out and put it together by hand, like the old mechanical style, because you couldn't do it on the computer yet. Then my friend Roger Black saw that I was doing this, and he had a friend of his draw some of it for me, and it was digitized, and we used it, but the spacing and some of the drawing of it wasn't refined, and we usually went back to doing it by hand. And then we set up formats for it, and I hired a fellow named Brian Boyce to go down to the public and essentially create handbills with it. And we made swag. And then this is the things that the public made every day. And there were a bunch of formats for them that he followed, making this typography justified and simply printing it out on a Xerox machine sometimes in multicolors, and they gave them to people. Sometimes they were cheaply printed, sometimes they were just printed out locally and cut and made by hand. And this was the language of the public theater when we first began doing it. I decided to use the same language when we began to promote Shakespeare in the Park, which was still part of the public theater. And what you're looking at, if you don't know, and you might not, is a 9X Bell telephone kiosk that used to exist in the old days on every block of every street in New York City. There was a telephone, and the telephone had space on the side for advertisement. So when the public theater identity launched for the Free Shakespeare in the Park, this kiosk was running all the way up and down Manhattan on every avenue, and this image was seen immediately, and it looked startling compared to normal advertising. So from the moment I did this thing, it became very visible at once. However, I also made individual posters for individual plays at the public, and the posters were based on the content of the play. Like Hymn was about Elvis Presley, that Christopher Walken had written, and The Divas Dismissed was a one-woman show. And these were silk screens, and we found a good silk screener and made these posters. And people really think that everybody saw these public theater posters because now people collect them and everybody kind of knows them in the graphic design industry, but actually the real public never saw them. And the real public never saw them because they weren't out on the street because we could never get them sniped. We had one sniping campaign and the posters were taken down. So we printed all these posters, we hung them up in the public theater, and people in the plays took them and designers took them, and they got into annuals. but they actually did not affect the viewing public of New York City. And we made a lot of them. And they, one after one, nobody had seen them. We would also make advertising for the newspapers in black and white, but they were very small spaced ads and they had zero impact. Sometimes we didn't even get them printed. A line around the block, which I think was collected, I think there was like 1 or 2 screen copies of it, and it was never really a fully printed run. The one on the left was. These were both printed, but I don't think anybody saw them, unless they were in a design annual. The one on the left here was never printed, and the one on right was printed at half size. But they all turn up in books all at the same size. If you look at a design annual, you have no idea what size anything is. I remember Steve Heller made a book on handwriting in design, and he put one of my map paintings that are 10 feet by 10 feet next to a book jacket, and they look like they're the same size. It's crazy. So your orientation of what exists when you learn things that way are really thrown. That's why you can't trust Instagram. You have no idea what you're looking at. This was one of the few posters that made it to the street, but it only lasted there about a week and a half. I continued to make them though, because I really didn't know how else to promote the plays. And that was my job, was to promote the plays. The things that people did see were these Shakespeare in the Park posters, and they saw them because they were hung in the subways. Even when the phone kiosks went away, even today, they exist in the subway, and they exist in every subway train line in New York City, and they also exist on the Metro North lines up to Westchester and on the lines that go into Newark, New Jersey, and the suburbs in Newark. So they're really in the tri-state area, and people do know them, but they only come out once a year. I find that people collect them. They call me and they'll say, oh, do you have that big Henry, the Henry with the big V on it? Because my husband proposed to me near that poster and I want to buy it. And it becomes part of somebody's recollection. Or the people who are in the plays come and ask me for them. And we never put the names of the artists on the posters. We only put the directors and authors of the plays, because if you put the names of the actresses, and some of them were quite famous, if you put them on the posters, then their managers would want approval of the artwork, and you never get anything made. So we just outlawed it, which was the smartest thing I ever did in my career, I think. These things were reprinted in the New York Times as full pages, and that was in the days that the Times actually contributed back to cultural life in New York. That era is gone. You can't afford to do this now. But these were really quite beautiful, and they were seen. The building itself was the place where you saw what was going on at the public. And these were the original first 3 flags I designed for the building. They change every year, but have graphics that are public theater graphics. And I met an architect named James Stewart Polshek, because he was the building architect, and he saw my identity and said, let's paint everything in the building white and just hang your graphics everywhere. And that was his idea of doing a quick fix to the lobby, which needed a redesign. They had mirrored walls on all the walls, and it looked like a bordello in there, and he completely reshaped it. I didn't know how to handle signage. I had never worked in a signage project, and he handed me a roll of architect's plans, and he said, well, why don't you stick your banners with your graphics in each one of these entryways? That's going to look really great. And I didn't know how to do it. So I went back to Pentagram, and Michael Beirut, who had done environmental graphics, had a woman who was architecturally trained, and she knew how to read the drawing. And I said, what do I do? And she says, well, you see this opening here? And I said, yeah. She says, measure the opening, then make something that fits in the opening and stick it in there. And suddenly I was an environmental graphics designer. It was really that simple. From doing this theater lobby, I began doing theaters. Outside and inside, and theaters led to office buildings and led to other cultural institutions, and environmental design became 50% of my work life, really by accident, from this one project at the Public Theater. In 1995-96, George Wolfe wrote a musical called Bringin' the Noise, Bringin' the Funk. And it was a tap rap musical, and the poster you're looking at, which is probably the most well-known of the series, was not a poster for that show by itself. It was a season poster for the whole season. And it was a public theater look with a blown up Savian Glover, because we thought that was going to be the lead play. The typography of it was loud and designed to work with the subject matter of the Tap Rap musical. And there were a number of posters in that whole series. The first one on the left was photographed by my partner, Peter Harrison, at the Pentagram office on 204 Fifth Avenue in the upstairs conference room. And Savian came in with those big open heavy boots and danced right on the middle of the floor while Peter shot pictures, and it was quite glorious. And the one on the right was done much later after the show moved to Broadway, and it was a hit, and it was photographed by Richard Avedon. There was lots of what I call crapola, all kinds of swag and materials that were designed in that style that existed to promote the public, a big fancy playbill kind of book that you could purchase that was designed very much in the style. And this work was done probably in 96, 97. And it became emblematic of public theater style, and it also became emblematic of New York. The big problem with the public theater graphics is that you'll notice there's no public theater logo on them because the show had moved uptown to Broadway. So the Ambassador Theater is advertised, not the public theater. And the real public, the public at large, saw the Broadway posters and the books and the things that were out on the street, not the things that were down at the public theater. So they recognized the graphic style, but they didn't connect it to the public theater. Here it is on the sidewalk. Here it is on the side of the building. Actually, what happened was that Savian Glover had a drug problem when he was kicked out of the show. So I had to make a giant billboard, so I just used his feet. And then got a legal letter saying you cannot use any part of Savian Glover, including his feet. So he changed it to the bottom of the foot. And that became the next series for this thing. And this one I hand drew. What's interesting to me about all of this is the public theater was supposed to get the visibility it needed, but it didn't. What got it were those theaters where it was playing at. And the graphics became not the identity of the public theater, but really the identity of theatrical life in New York City. This thing made the street, it was sniped, and then it was imitated. And the imitations, I've never had anything quite like this happen, where an identity is just ripped off all over the place. It was in so many places that I didn't know how to deal with it. And the worst was in Chicago, which simply used the type style, not the more eclectic part of it. But Chicago had so much more money than the public theater to advertise and promote. You would see a big Chicago bus go by, and then if you saw something from the public, you'd say, oh, look, they're knocking off Chicago. That really can happen. So I didn't know what to do. I mean, I had lost, the public theater seemed to have lost its identity totally because Chicago had wiped it away. By the same token, my partner, Michael Beirut, started designing graphics for the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and he created a system. He only did the graphics for them for the first year that he designed the identity, and then stepped back and had an in-house art department executing them. And they were so consistent and thorough and recognizable that in many ways, that basis was a better way of doing the job. I felt like I had actually failed the public because nobody knew what they looked like. I decided to just completely change it and make it other and do a series of posters that were, you know, the opposite of the public theater, that were withdrawn and quiet, looked a little more intellectual, weren't as populist. And I showed them to George Wolfe, and he allowed me to do them, but he said, oh dear, Paul is turning 50, let's have a year of depressing posters. And we did. Then I got undepressed and I started to think, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll do them in the style and the spirit of the public theater original typography, but change the font each year so I don't get caught up in this. And I would pick a font, and that would be the font for the year. And then I would do everything in that design, but they weren't different enough to really detail what I was doing. It looked more like I was making a mistake. Like the font in this year was not that different from the font in the previous year. So you couldn't tell that the thing had changed drastically. It sort of was pointless. By the way, George at this time had been producing other plays that he was doing in the Shakespeare Festival during the summer. And he took one of them to Broadway, and then it was a flop. And then he started another play that launched purely on Broadway called Wild Party, and it was an even bigger flop. And he blew the foundation of the public theater, and the board wanted to fire him, except for half the board didn't, because they thought he just needed a financial manager. And there was a giant fight, and they hired a woman who will remain nameless, who went to war with George Wolfe and tried to push him out of his job. So there were camps at the public theater, those who were friends of George, those who were enemies of George, and I counted, I guess, as a friend of George, because after I had done a season, she came up to Pentagram and she said, you know, Paula, we're out of money, we're really broke, and I know you want to make posters, but we can't afford to print any more posters or pay your salary. So, you know, look, I think this is where we're going to have to part ways. And I said, I was surprised that she was even saying it to me. I thought it would come from George. And I said, well, you're going to do the summer poster, aren't you? She says, well, we don't even know that. And so I said, all right, well, when you're ready to do the summer poster, give me a call. Anyway, the summer poster came out, and it wasn't designed by me. It was designed by somebody knocking off the style, which looked like everything else on the street anyway, so it didn't matter, I guess. But within a period, she was out of the public. She was pushed out, I think about 6 months later. And Gail Papp, Joe Papp's widow, was disgusted with the way everything looked at the public and said, can't we get that nice lady back? So they came and they asked me to be on the board. And they thought that being on the board was payment for the work. I didn't see how being on the board was payment on the work. I mean, it was, I guess it's an honor to be on the board, or it was my donation to the public, which I would buy, but I actually sort of found the board a little bit boring. But I joined it. And at that particular time, Oscar Eustis became the new director of the Public Theater, and George Wolfe resigned. And George had resigned actually after the terrible woman had left. And there was a year where he had a nice woman named Mara Manis who stayed, and she was supposed to help Oscar get used to the Public Theater. Except they clashed. And you find that your work is always affected by the relationships of the people you're working with. So in the first year I worked with Oscar, he asked me to make a 50th anniversary identity for the public because the Shakespeare in the Park was now 50 years old. And I wanted to get rid of the wood type because I was really depressed that everybody was using it. So I redrew the Public Theater logo in Accidents Grotesque, if you can believe it. Here it is, and you're looking at Accidents Grotesque for everything. And I thought, well, make that the typeface of the Public Theater. Isn't that absurd, you know, to make this modernist font being used like an American wood type? But it amused me for a while. I liked the posters we made in the first season. They were very noticeable. They seemed cleaner and strong and different, but really in the same style of what we had been doing. They're very pop, they're very, very large scale and in your face and legible. And then the following year, I made a poster with the Accidents Grotesque in upper and lower, and that looked a little more different and a little farther away from the public style. I happen to like this poster because I had been making posters at this scale at this point for about 12 years. And this is the first time I realized that they were the exact same size and scale of the proportion of Central Park. So the whole poster is a map. The green part's the park itself, and the streets on the side are the actual where the streets are around Central Park. And you see the D with the arrow, and that's the Delacorte Theater, where Shakespeare in the Park is shown. But this was the reality of my life. The final year of Mara Manis and Oscar's relationship, it'll show you what happens when two people within an organization don't agree on anything. I never made sketches and comps like this. I made one or two things, talked about it with George, and they were made. That was the way we worked. We worked because there was a lot of work, not a lot of money, and not a lot of time. And then to make this one Shakespeare poster, I went through the computer. They didn't even look good when I got them all on the page. And I said, why the hell was I doing that? And then I remembered 2 people didn't get along. They kept arguing with each other about every detail. So Mara Manis left and Oscar stayed. And Mara was a friend of mine and I barely knew Oscar. So I was sort of scared. The next season, oh, by the way, this was the result of that poster, which is one of the weakest posters we ever worked on. But the next season, it got better because I worked with Oscar directly. He was doing Romeo, Juliet, and Midsummer's Night Dream. We said free love in Central Park. What could be better? And we did this poster very quickly with absolutely no problem. And it was a dream. But he called me up and he said he wanted to take me to lunch. And I thought, uh-oh, you know, a new director establishing his own voice, wiping away the memory of George Wolfe. Here it comes. And I just assumed I was going to be fired. And I went to lunch with him. I was still on the board. I guess maybe he was going to ask me to step down from the board. I don't know what he was going to ask. And he said that he loved the public theater when I first did it, when he saw it. And he said he'd love to just reinvent and try something new. Would I do something new for him along the same lines? So I was sort of intrigued by the challenge and I wanted to see if I could design a system as opposed to typographic posters that would hold up better in places like the New York Times or in the Village Voice or in the small space ads they were buying in New York Magazine, as opposed to being reliant on the picture. So I wanted to make purely a black and white identity and created this very gridded, very formatted way of approaching it. And we did a lot of unification that was right. In other words, there were programs that were made, that were put on at the public, that were made by small outside studios and didn't look anything like the public theater. So we began to universally connect them and it became more like I would say, an expected identity solution where you're making sure that all the components relate to each other and can lay them all on the table and find out, you know, that they're one place and understand them that way. And we made the season brochures and did them inexpensively and did them in small books. And the Shakespeare in the Park poster, this year I especially liked it. The following year, I thought it really had gotten boring. It was interesting that in creating a format, you neutralized the kind of vibrance that all those errors of design created. In other words, that it seemed to me that this theater and this place and the spirit of this place was diminished by trying to be obedient about making all things consistent. Therefore, I had failed again. And that in this iteration of it, it didn't matter if the individual piece was okay. What mattered was how are they connecting to each other and how often could you do this? I began to move these apart more, add color to them. And none of these were really produced. They lived mostly at the public and they existed in black and white as small space ads. But I found that I really could not sustain it long term. I could do it for a season and then I was tired of it. And at this point in time, and while I was still on the board, we were beginning to redesign the public theater lobby in a permanent way. And we hired Jim Polshek again to work on the lobby, and I was really excited about doing the signage when somebody on the board turned to me and said, "You can't do the signage in the public theater lobby." And I said, "Why not?" And they said, "Well, it's a New York City project. You're on the board. It would be a conflict of interests." So I thought, but I'm here for free. I don't, you know, and they said, "Nope, that's the law." So I resigned the board. And I resigned the board, and everybody said, "What? You're resigning the board?" And I said, "Yeah, I don't want to be on the board. I want to do the lobby. I don't want to walk into the lobby and have it be some other designer. That's ridiculous." They all thought I was crazy. They didn't understand how a designer thinks. So I began working on the lobby, and we had a lot of fun doing it. We hired a sculptor I know who makes digital sculptures to build us a chandelier that has all of these blades. He has a place called Ear Studio, and I'm blanking on his name right now. I'm embarrassed to say. The blades that you're looking at on the chandelier play every single one of Shakespeare's plays in total very quickly. And if you stand there and you're really bored, you can read them all. He was forced to use the public theater type, which, by the way, I had shifted at this point. When I redesigned the identity, I shifted to Jonathan Heffler's Knockout. And if you see Jonathan Heffler's abstract episode, you'll see public theater work that I showed you from the beginning. And if you watch the episode, it looks like that was a knockout. It wasn't. It was in the hand cup type I stole from CBS Records and cut up and reused on those ads. So go back and look at it again and find the error. In any event, all the typography was incised into the building, which made it kind of encapsulated and made permanent. It wasn't going to move around again. This was it. And it is embedded in arches and goes around columns, and you'll notice this big red field of plastic that serves as a balcony. It's in the donor's wall typography. And here behind the box office, when I saw a montage that we built of all the posters I had made there put together, I realized what I was doing wrong, finally, all these years. And it was that the public theater is about a spirit, and the individual plays can be hits or can be failures. It's not Broadway. It's not based on the hit show that packs people in the seats. It's a community experience, and that the people who belong to the public theater, the membership, are coming for all the things that go on at the public. The minute you isolated individual shows and they had better images or more recognizable images than other shows, you were marginalizing certain activities. And I had never really thought about it that way. I hadn't really understood how to do my job. The first season, we opened with this sort of red barring device that was breaking up imagery on the posters, and it was designed much more like an advertising campaign. And I'll show you, this is more of the awning and the structure, but this was the campaign, and it had real copy attached to it, and we bought real public space for it. It existed on the last of the phone kiosks, it existed in the subways, and it existed inside the subway trains. And people began to recognize it and recognize that something was going on at this place called the Public. We also changed the logo, by the way, just to show it to you. We had done it in the other one. It was the Public period, not the Public Theater anymore. Then when we began doing Shakespeare in the Park, we thought, well, we're up at the Delacorte Theater. This was the graphics that season for the play. Why don't we actually make signage for the theater out of the graphics? And why don't we extend these graphics to Joe's Pub, which was the cabaret inside the theater, which had its own identity that was brought to it by Joe's Pub when it moved there. And what we did is actually enforce that they get rid of their own identity and take the public theater's identity. And they were happy to do it because the Joe's Pub and the Public were connected very much in the lobby renovation. So it made total sense because you walk through one space into another. Here's the signage we did for the Shakespeare Festival that way based on those graphics. But the following year was the year I really began to figure it out. There was a woman who was my student. Her name is Kirsten Huber. She's wonderful. She became my intern at Pentagram. And I sent her down to the public theater to work inside and to help me out on things when we were doing the lobby. And we made a real art director position for her. And she began to hire some staff. And we took a season poster, which was this Comedy of Errors poster. And here are the different configurations of it. And we made the same kind of signs we did the year before, using that as a system. And then extending it to everything that was connected to the public. Then what we did with it is we said, well, what if we flop the colors and translate it into the season? so that the devices that were used in the poster were in things like outlines and see-through typography would become elements of the season altogether. It worked, and then we did the next season. And the next season we started with this sort of black and green color break of skewed lettering that worked like this at the Delacorte Theater and outside, but then we turned it into just black and yellow for the season. And by the way, if you scroll down, you'll see the name of the play that came out last year that you might have heard of, called Hamilton, which came out of the Public Theater about 5 years ago. The notion was the equalization of this, these are all titles of plays you're looking at, made none of them stars or none of them more successful than the other. And what you began to notice is that the difference between that and this are season graphics. And you notice that a whole season is different. These things are introduced in the summer. They're started in the summer, and then they continue all the way to the following May, and then they go away. And they repeat, and they're managed by the team downtown. And I look at every single one of these things. Like, they start out on a poster, they show me a sketch, I move it around, then they make it, then I look at it, I crit it, and it comes out. And they're terrific. And the virtuosity is wonderful. This is the way I work. I think there's a mistaken slide in here, by the way. This is a drawing for the free poster, which you should have seen before we sort of mixed up the slide. It's a drawing for this, which was the following season. And this is when the people at the theater began to really embrace this, because they called the season before the zigzaggy one because it was at angles. And they started calling this one the slashy one because type was cut through things. And it was as if all the culture of the theater recognized the season change more than they recognized shows, and they saw it as community, and they were part of that community. And they would say, which one do you like more? Did you like the slashy one, or did you like the the zigzag? And they would have conversations like that. Or what season did you perform in? And somebody would say, oh, I was in the slash. No, I was in the reverse one. Or I was in the stretchy type, which you'll see coming up. And they were names that happened inside that I had nothing to do with. So in creating these things, you began to create a culture that you had no idea would happen as a result. But the best thing that happened with this is that the membership went up, almost doubled. And it doubled because of the programming and the membership combined. There was just so much stuff going on, and there was the spirit of so much stuff going on. And I realized it took me 15 to 20 years to learn how to do my job. That you can't know. This is the season that was an abstract that you may have seen that I was working on, and I still work on these things this way. And here it's extended to signage. We hadn't gotten there when I was doing it for the show, and this is the way it got extended to other plays and Joe's Pub and all things together. And this was the year after it where I knew this whole thing was a success with the city, because in this particular year, there was a play that Oscar Eustis directed in Central Park that was a remake of Julius Caesar, but it was done in modern dress, and Caesar looked like Trump. And it was a criticism of Trump, the way the language was handled and the play was handled. And Trump supporters were outraged, and people withdrew their support, and they lost Delta Airlines as a corporate sponsor. And yet at the same time, they got all kinds of people supporting them. So it was a little mini culture war in and of itself. And what I loved about it was that the New York Post, when they had to talk about it on the front page of the paper, the Daily News also, they all used the theater poster, not the actor who played Julius Caesar or even the Public Theater logo. It was what the season looked like. And that's where I knew the thing had actually done its job and gotten into New York City life. This was the following year, 2 years ago, and we began animating these. I can't do it on Zoom, but the B extends and it moves across the screen, and all of these are designed with different stretch. They call this the stretchy one, in case you want to know which one that is. And the following year, which was all of last season, was the circus one. And we've designed a new one that should have launched this spring, but COVID came and it's locked up, and we hope we'll pull it out in September. Right now, the theater's closed, and they're working and trying to do things virtually, which everybody in theater hates, but are doing. And it's like the lights have dimmed in New York City because so much of theatrical life is dead. It'll come back, and it'll be loud and boisterous and great. But my relationship with the theater is like a marriage, and that it's had highs and it's had lows, and that I've learned a lot. And I remember that my partner, Alan Fletcher, once said at a partners meeting that if you're in a business and you invent something and you look at those businesses that do that, they spend about 25% of their profit on research and development. And graphic designers don't do that. They really don't. They do the job, and whatever the job teaches them, that's all they get. The public theater was my R&D. I stayed with it. I figured out how to make it work. It'll probably fail at some point. There are things I couldn't have possibly known when I started doing it in 1994. How can you know when you think you're doing theater advertising, and it's out on the street or it's in the Times, that really the place you're going to see it is on Instagram? There's no way you can know that ever at all. And that's the magic of staying at a place that long and making it grow and move through the time. So this is the book. It's even in more detail than I took you through, if you can stand it. And it's 250 pages, available at Princeton Architectural Press. You can purchase it now online. If there is an open bookstore, it should be in the stores in September, but it was supposed to be out in April, so I don't know, but I'm glad you can see it, and thank you very much. Oh, there are 5 posters that are rolled up and put in the back of the book that you can hang up.
Sean.
It's so gorgeous. I mean, obviously, you know, and I think you're wrong. I think when you say, oh, you failed, I don't think that's true. I mean, obviously there are going to be some solutions that you think are more successful than others, but throughout all of it, even when it was a primary image, it still reads as the public. You manage to maintain that identity as a spirit, regardless of the actual application. It holds together beautifully because I think it has your work in it. I mean, you're the thing that ties it together. That maintains the brand as an identity.
I admit that that's true, because you don't get rid of your own sensibility in it. But in terms of the failure, I wasn't really talking about crafting graphic design. I'm really talking about understanding how a place operates and how the public, meaning not the theater, real people, see things and engage things. It was easy to be known with design audiences with this thing because I had control of the graphics in a way I didn't in most of my other projects. But it was hard to make it really successful for the theater, where they actually grew as a result of this thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm not kidding that it took me 15 or 16 years to figure it out. And as a result of it, other theaters have been asking me to do it for them because they were focusing on individual plays and not realizing that the individual plays do not help if you're a not-for-profit theater or a repertory company with continually rotating shows. An individual play success does not help you with the whole theater. It only helps you with that one play.
I agree with what Sean said, and I guess I'm your public, because I'm a product of living right near the public theater when it opened up as a New Yorker. I don't even know if I think I was in graphic design then, yeah. But still, I was so amazed at how fresh and how much, and I agree with you, how it initially captured this sense of originality in what the theater was trying to do in terms of opening theater and experimentation, and it wasn't Broadway. It was accessible. And then you're right, there was a moment maybe that people got used to the public. And I think you re-energized it, because I remember Paul Davis' work, you know, first, and then it kind of loved his work. But
he said the last 10 years of his 19 years were really not great. You know, like his best work was in the early time, and
right.
that has to do with the politics of the place. I mean, designers, and this is very important for the audience to understand, designers never work in a vacuum. You know, the people that you're working with, the politics, the money, whatever the situation is at the times, has so much to do with what you're capable of actually accomplishing.
Yeah, do you think you stayed with the public? And this is someone from the audience wants to know, you think you stayed with the public because there was something inside of you that just kept saying, I can do better. I'm not there yet.
I still feel that way. Yes.
Well, I have to say though, you migrated out here, didn't you, to the Pasadena Playhouse?
Well, I'm working on the Berkeley Theater now, so that's a little north of you, but
I know.
Yeah.
But when I saw that, I had no idea, Sean, that I believe the Pasadena Playhouse, which is blocks from us, and those of you who are here in California should actually take advantage of seeing again theater that is on the street. I mean, there is no Skyping here in California, unfortunately. And if people don't know what that means, it means in the middle of the night, you go and you put your posters up over construction site walls, and it's fabulous. And I do miss that, but
the thing I think students should recognize is how you took all of the negatives and made them work for you. So you took bad photography and you made it work for you. You took low budgets, you made it work for you. You didn't just say, oh, I did a crappy poster because I just had bad photos. That's always amazing, you know, when someone's like, yeah, this sucks, but I can do something great with it.
and someone wants to know, and I know I was thinking about this, but it's kind of asking, is this your favorite child? Would you consider working for the public one of your favorite clients?
Oh, no question. I mean, it's like, it was like a marriage. It still is. You know, first of all, you can't do this with everybody. They don't. The work isn't as interesting as this. I mean, this is incredibly interesting things to work on. Some of these plays are truly terrific. A lot of the writers and directors and producers are wonderful. The environment of the theater is spectacular. So it's, you know, not like, you know, doing brochures for IBM. You know, it is vibrant, and the possibilities are there. Bad photography or no, it's really what you can make of it, because I wasn't getting nitpicked on what face I was using or what color it was, or, you know, that was part of the deal. And when I went off the board to do the lobby, and they wanted to pay me, and I didn't want to be paid, because the minute they paid me, they ruined the relationship. And that, because it started to become that exchange of money, also meant some power shifted in relationship to how I would be listened to and what I would tell them. And I did that deliberately, because this was my R&D, and that I'm serious about that. You cannot, to be able to work like this, you have to be in this kind of a controlled situation with great subject matter, great relationships, total trust. Mm-hmm. And then reason, you know, an ability to fail, an ability to have a substandard season, an ability to make a mistake without having to worry about it. I mean, that's really the purest act of it. So yes, there aren't projects like this, and the project happened it osmosed to become this through this series of relationships over a period of time. But at this point in time, I'm so much part of the organization that, you know, that's, you know, I'm woven into the fabric of the culture, so that makes it also easier.
Yeah, I think you're answering a lot of attendees' questions just by explaining, you know, your relationship with the public, It is interesting to build trust with clients, or clients to build trust with you. And you're right, working for the public theater is very different than working for IBM. It's theater, it's art, it's right, Sean, it's constantly changing. So the material you're working with is also constantly changing. You know,
well, I think the genius also is that, you know, like you said, like so much theater graphics are just terrible. Like, and it's because, you know, usually it's like, oh, that came along with the show. We had to use that ugly graphic from Oklahoma. And it's just like, we put our logo on the bottom and that's enough. And I mean, the idea of saying no to that, no, the brand is the public.
Right.
That's what the focus is. That's the experience, not so-and-so's version of, you know, Singing in the Rain.
Right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. And that also, in doing this, because they have bought that. They've bought the notion that they're not going to do that they have ownership over whatever it is they do. And they do pick up other people's plays, and then we change the images. The images fit into the public theater's graphics. Well, that's the way it is. But what the things are great. You know, if you're designing for a company that's making consumer electronics, there's a limit to the kind of expression you're going to be able to have just by virtue of what the subject matter is. It doesn't mean you can't push it. It's just that I know this from my work in the record industry, that it was some of the worst possible work to some of the best possible work, that the entertainment industries on a whole that are allowing it, the most creative part of it can be the most creative thing you can possibly do in the industry, compared to certain other forms of corporations. You know, like if you look at a structure like Apple, which I assume is a great place to work, the consistency is elegant and terrific, and there's nothing that isn't professional or looks very clean, but that's not very adventurous work at a certain point in time, because they're doing the same thing over and over again.
So is there a client or an organization you would love to get your hands on?
That's interesting. I would like to get my hands on the federal government for a number of reasons. No, I really would, because
I from a design point of view, Paula, from a design point of view.
No, I'm talking about really from a design point of view. I think that, you know, seeing European government work, the United States government's really backwards, and it could be beautiful and it could be American. You know, it doesn't have to look like Swiss modern design. There's a way to do it that would be great, and America should do it. I mean, it's like there are things that departments of government, cities, there are things that command our attention that can be fantastic. I mean, I love working in New York. I do a lot of work with the Parks Department, and I do a lot of public places, and I find that work very satisfying, because you have public engagement.
Right.
Corporations, there's some very good ones, but they tend to be more limited in the way the public feels about them, I think. I think that's it's not that it's not satisfying, it's limited work. Politics.
Well, from your lips to perhaps the next turnover in Washington, perhaps we can have some changes in not just personnel, but the whole design of what we look at, which would be fantastic, you know. But
well, I don't have a lot of faith in Joe Biden's logo, so I don't know.
Oh boy, here it goes. Let's not do public criticism. I know that is a whole nother discussion.
The logo was a mistake.
Yeah, let's have that analysis after November 3rd. Okay, then we can do the analysis of the visuals of the upcoming election. But I wanted to thank Sean and Paula and everyone who attended. I know we have students who are rushing off to class. It's okay, Sean, they have to wait for you. So
that's true. They do have to wait for class. Not necessarily. They do better without me.
And also for all the other instructors. It's been a delight, and thank you for me bringing back I'm a little homesick now. That's all I can say. Bringing back a lot of incredible, beautiful design memories too. It was a real stake in the ground, I think, culturally in New York City when you redid the public theater and brought it to what it is today. And I think it continues. And thank you so much. And one of the comments from someone was, they can see how much you love the work that's in the background of your studio. So I want to thank everyone. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, sweetie, so
Thank you.
much.
Thank
I
you,
miss
Paula.
you. Big virtual kiss.
And thank you, everyone, again. This was a delight. Bye.
Bye.